The Lich is one of the most feared monsters in fantasy. A powerful undead wizard who has existed for hundreds or even thousands of years, it's capable of using the vast knowledge that it's accumulated over the centuries for supremely dark purposes. So it might surprise you to learn that the concept itself is much younger than the expected lifespan of one of these fiends. Unlike most fantasy monsters, whose origins go back to the Middle Ages, ancient Greece, or even earlier, the Lich only achieved prominence in the 20th century, thanks to some of that period's best-known fantasy writers and games. And surprisingly, Tolkien isn't one of them, though he may have included the Lich in his writings, but only as a once-mentioned side character. So let's uncover the history behind one of the most dangerous foes your party will ever have the misfortune to face, the Lich. The word Lich goes back much farther than the monster, and it's related to a word you likely use every day. In fact, I just did. Maybe you've heard the term Lich Gate in medieval sources or stories. That refers to a roofed gate to a churchyard, where a corpse would be set to await the arrival of a clergyman. The first part of that word, the one we're interested in, can sometimes be spelled with a Y and pronounced with a long I and hard K sound, Lich. And that's no coincidence. The word means body or corpse in Old English. That shares a root with an older word that means form or shape, which you can understand being related to a word that means body since that's the shape of a person. A similar word appears in Beowulf, referring to a body. And what do you say about two things that have the same form or shape? You say that they're like each other. So lich and like have the same root, and sometimes even the same pronunciation. It's also where the suffix ly comes from, which usually means that something is like the root word. Isn't etymology fun? Anyway, now that we know why the monster is called what it is, let's see where it comes from. The most common description of a lich is a sorcerer or wizard who's found a way to extend its life beyond death, so as to continue its nefarious plans for potentially hundreds of years. Many ancient cultures have had their versions of undead sorcerers or necromancers, but those typically fall into the categories of other monsters, like mummies. A lich, as we understand it today, has a very distinct set of traits. Physically, the lich often appears similar to more common undead, such as zombies or skeletons, but unlike those, which are usually portrayed as minions of a more powerful being, a lich is its own master, answering to none. They're typically portrayed as evil, since anyone who cheats death in that manner tends to be self-serving and lustful of power, and even if they had good intentions, the spells and rituals required would twist and pervert nearly anyone. That separates a lich from other willful undead, like vampires or revenants, who may or may not have been willing participants in their revivals. A lich, on the other hand, deliberately seeks out immortality through magic. Those other kinds of monsters can also usually be killed through physical violence, like beheading or burning, but it takes something very specific to kill a lich. One of the earliest examples of a lich might be the tale surrounding Koshchei the Deathless, a villain from Russian mythology dating back to the Middle Ages. More recently, he's also shown up as an adversary of Hellboy in comic books. He's sometimes portrayed as being married to another heavyweight of Russian folklore, Baba Yaga, and as you can probably tell by his name, he's pretty hard to kill. Even though the word isn't used to describe him, one major similarity he has to a modern lich is that the means to definitively kill him are hidden inside an object that is itself stored in a remote location. That gets us to the concept of the phylactery, a tiny item that contains some aspect of the lich's life force, or the pact it made with darker powers to extend its life, that must be destroyed to truly kill it. In the real world, a phylactery is an amulet or a relic meant to ward off evil, or a box, also called a tefillin, that contains verses from the Torah, sometimes worn by Jewish men during prayers. So it's easy to see how something like that could be adapted to represent a pact or other life-preserving magical item worn by a lich. Whatever their origins, it wouldn't be until the 20th century that liches really took off in the public consciousness. The earliest uses of the word lich in literature don't have quite the same meaning that we give it today, even as it was used by some of the pioneers of fantasy fiction. Clark Ashton Smith used the term many times in his 1932 story The Empire of the Necromancers, but they refer to zombies or mummies raised by the necromancers to serve them. The skull-headed necromancer Thulsa Doom was a nemesis of Robert E. Howard's Kull the Conqueror, as well as his more famous relation, Conan the Barbarian, and seems to check all the boxes of a lich, though many stories about the character were adapted or published decades after Howard's death in 1936, so it's unclear as to whether he used the term in his original writings nearly 100 years ago. H.P. Lovecraft used the word in his 1933 story The Thing on the Doorstep, and it at least shares some similarities with the lich as we know it today. In that story, the narrator's friend's body is slowly being taken over by a dark magician who has recently died. To end the creature once and for all, he shoots the friend who's being held in an asylum and states that, "I will not change souls with that bullet-ridden lich in the madhouse." The theme of a wizard using dark magic to live past death is present, but it's being done via another person's body, which the narrator claims has happened at least once before, so this probably doesn't quite match the definition of a lich, at least as we understand it today. J.R.R. Tolkien featured plenty of undead in The Lord of the Rings, but he never used the term lich. Despite their immortality and powers and their life forces being bound to a magic item, I'd argue that the Nazgul aren't liches, since they're bound to Sauron, and liches are usually portrayed as being independent. But there is one character in the books who seems to fit the bill. When Aragorn and his army march to the Black Gate of Mordor, they're met by the Mouth of Sauron, who lies to them and tells them Frodo is dead. The rider was robed all in black, and black was his lofty helm. Yet this was no ringwraith, but a living man. But it is told that he was a renegade, who came of the race of those that are named the Black Númenóreans, for they established their dwellings in Middle-earth during the years of Sauron's domination, and they worshipped him, being enamored of evil knowledge. And he entered the service of the Dark Tower when it first rose again, and because of his cunning he rose ever higher in the Lord's favor. And he learned great sorcery, and knew much of the mind of Sauron, and he was more cruel than any orc. So you have an evil sorcerer who knows plenty of dark magic, has lived for thousands of years, and is cozy with, but not bound to, the really big evil? Sure, Tolkien does call him a living man, and he seems to have no other agency or role in the books, but still, he sounds pretty lichy to me. Most people will point to Dungeons & Dragons as the true origin of the modern Lich, and how it entered the public consciousness. Its most famous example of the monster is probably Vecna, whose name was repurposed to serve as the main villain in Stranger Things. The Lich appeared on page 35 of the first D&D supplement, Greyhawk, published in 1975, and later on page 61 of the first edition Monster Manual, published in 1977. These appearances are what popularized the monster in fantasy for years to come. But where exactly did those versions of the Lich come from? In a forum post from 2007, Gary Gygax himself laid out where he got the ideas for several entries in the Monster Manual. For the Lich, he wrote, "Right on in regards to Gardner Fox. Gar and his wife Linda were friends of mine." That's in response to an earlier post which stated that the D&D Lich came from the character Afgorkon, in a story written by Gardner Fox. That story, The Sword of the Sorcerer, part of the Kotar Barbarian Swordsman series, was published in 1969, about a decade before the D&D books. The withered brown body on the form. He can make out bits of whitened bone and grisly fragments of flesh and hair protruding from the rotted cloth, was moving. It sighed as if it breathed immeasurable distances away. Its chest lifted and fell in a slow pulsing. Dwalka of the Warhammer, what was this thing? The corpse turned its head so that it could look at Kothar out of its empty eye sockets. The barbarian felt the touch of eyes, even though there were no eyes to see or be seen. He stiffened, his flesh crawled, his long fingers took a firmer grip on his sword haft. Even as he stared, the Lich sat up. I could only find one chapter of the series to read online, but based on a summary, it looks like Afgorkon's big plan was to just steal a witch's powers. Pretty mild for an undead sorcerer who's been sitting around for 50,000 years. I also couldn't find mention of Afgorkon's ultimate fate, or whether he had anything like a phylactery. My theory is that Gygax probably just took the cool idea of a super old undead wizard from Gardner Fox, and put his own spin on it when he created his version of the Lich for Dungeons & Dragons. And it's that version that stood the test of time. Because of its newness, the Lich hasn't seen a lot of scholarly work that focuses on it, but I don't think it's too hard to see why the creature, or similar variants, have become popular in modern fiction. By its nature, a Lich is supremely powerful and almost certainly evil, making an excellent nemesis for a hero or group of heroes. But a lot of arch-villains have a lot of power, so what makes a Lich stand out? I think it's the cheating death aspect of it. The notion of someone taking deliberate measures to live longer than they should as a means to accumulating or holding on to that power. A Lich bends or outright breaks the laws of nature to achieve its dominance. Maybe that's analogous to how we perceive people today who seem to possess an outsized share of power, like certain politicians or billionaires. Some of them bend or break our human laws to achieve their goals, but like a powerful undead sorcerer, who's going to stop them? The Lich and its ultimate defeat represent a kind of fantasy for us, the notion that good will prevail over this particular sort of untouchable, enduring evil, a version of which we might have to endure in our daily lives. And who knows? Science may one day make it possible for humans to live for hundreds of years. If that happens, it probably won't be you or me who gets access to the formula, but only those who can afford it. Maybe someday we'll have a real centuries-old villain to take down. Better keep your axe sharp, just in case. Thank you so much for watching my video about the origins of liches. If you liked the video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel, or leave a comment below letting me know what you thought, or of a future topic you'd like to see covered. Until next time, if you are confronted by a powerful undead wizard with hundreds of years worth of magic spells saved up, sorry, I don't have any advice. Just run.